here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the author Terry Newman, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry, and also her latest book that has just been published titled Marilyn Monroe Style. That's out on hardback from ACC Publishing, a stunning collection and work about celebrating the work of Marilyn Monroe's enduring influence, and has been written by Terry, but some amazing historic and rare photographs of Marilyn Monroe available from all good bookshops and also online. So you're going to find out more about this particular publication, also a bit about Terry Newman's background as well. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down really about the publication and also discussing about picture research, and this is where Terry picks it up.
You know, it's about kind of like trying to find great inspiration in images. When I did my first book, I had quite a stern American editor, and she said, listen, Terry, because if your books don't look great, no one's going to read them. And I took that to heart. So I mean, obviously, you know, for me, the writing is key, but it has to be balanced with some great pictures. And you couldn't, I was absolutely spoilt for choice when it came to Marilyn, because obviously there are so many iconic images of her.
Yes, and there's a lot of Marilyn, isn't there? In a way, he says in a sweeping statement, because there's the glamorous side, there's this kind of humble side, the family side, the family, the mental health issues, and the kind of incredible films that some of us grew up watching at Christmas, didn't we? Like Some Like It Hot, and then the incredible Misfits as well. So there is a lot of Marilyns, really, aren't there?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also I think that because I always look at things through the lens of the clothes that are worn, and I think that the clothes that Marilyn wore write her biography as fluently as kind of any interview or image can do, and key moments in her life, different stages that she was going through, or different kind of moments are forever associated with iconic outfits, and they sort of kind of can't be forgotten, sort of burnt on the retina of your eye almost. I mean, obviously everybody now knows the dress that she wore to sing Happy Birthday, Mr. President to JFK in 1962. It was this kind of beautiful rhinestone Jean-Louis gown, and she mesmerized the audience with it. And of course now, fast forward, 2022, and Kim Kardashian sort of controversially squeezes into it and tells American Vogue, what's the most American thing I can think of? Well, that's Marilyn Monroe. So I thought I'd try and, wear some of her clothes. And that kind of went viral at the time. But yeah, no, I mean, there are quintessential Marilyn outfits, and they live eternally in that cultural landscape. And, many celebrities sort of make up Team Monroe, and they reference and I defend her wardrobe, and so her memory lives on and on and on.
And when did you first come aware of Marilyn in your own life?
Oh gosh, I think like many sort of desperate young children, I read about her when I was a teenager, and I was sort of dreaming of fantasizing about lives not yet lived, and just the sort of fairy tale of her life captured me. I think I must have been about 14 or 15 when I started reading as much as I could about her, never thinking I'd ever write a book about her myself. But I mean, she's got that kind of magical fairy tale about her that's just so captivating. But not just that. Now I've written the book about her. I sort of think of her as a really, sort of amazing woman. I mean, she defended civil rights. She defended, her husband and others, when there was the McCarthy trials in America. She was a woman in Hollywood when things were not easy for women in Hollywood. And she went and sort of set up her own production company, which was a very sort of unusual thing to do. And so she had a lot of self-determination. And of course, her background, she was an orphan, and she sort of she said there was this beautiful quote that I found, and she said, "There's lots of girls in Hollywood dreaming about being a star, but I'm dreaming the hardest." And I think that really kind of captivated me when I was younger. But then now I'm older and I've written the book. There's so much more to her as well that feels inspiring.
Yes, I mean, yeah, there's quite a lot there, isn't there? Because I guess I'm not sure. I was born 1964, so I had that kind of moment with Elton John and "Candle in the Wind," and as I might
Oh
have said
yeah.
earlier, was very excited with our Christmas movies, and "Some Like It Hot" appeared. So one often heard a name of somebody those days because we had no internet, even no landline, in fact, or colour
Yeah, yeah.
television.
No,
So
that's
so
where
it
the
was
way
like
we
you'd hear.
rolled, wasn't it?
Yes, so you'd heard names like Elvis or Little Richard, but you didn't really know who they were until you sort of got these little glimpses of them. And then, there was that kind of the story that Elton tells or Bernie tells in that song, which is all about this tragedy of this young person dying, and then sort of unpicking a bit of her life. And there was the glamorous side, and then there's that sad side kind of immediately. So there's a sort of a melancholia in her life, and this kind of beginning, which is the sort of the Second World War photograph of her sort of in the promotional image of her in the factory as well, which was quite
Mm,
interesting. So she
yeah.
straddles an interesting social period as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that I sort of, found quite interesting, well, very interesting, was the fact that she grew up in the American Depression. She grew up in a time of great, there were a lot of people who were very deprived, and she was kind of almost on the bottom of that pile. And so when she was growing up, and clothes were very scarce. She was very frugal with her clothes. She grew up in orphanages and she grew up in foster families, and she didn't have very many. She had sort of like two or three sort of skirts and two or three blouses that she would wear and wash and wear on repeat. And the thing that I found was that when I looked at her as as a star, even, there was still some of that kind of make, do, and mend about her. She was pretty frugal, really, for a glamorous star. She would borrow clothes from the studio and she would return them. If she found something that she liked, she would buy it and wear it again and again. And there was this real sort of yin and yang about her wardrobe that reflects a little bit what you were sort of saying about the melancholia and the sort of star. There's off screen, she was quite plain and simple, and I think very, very chic. And she didn't kind of do Marilyn off screen, if you like. She was, she sort of wore little capri pants and jeans, a lot of jeans
Yes, a
and
lot of
plain
Levi in there.
blouses, Levi's. Yeah, absolutely right. And then on screen she sort of mesmerized and sort of styled herself, and became this sort of superstar of the silver screen. And I think my sort of theory is that a lot of this is to do with her growing up, because she grew up, as I say, in the Depression. And one of the few things that she could do was go to the cinema and watch her, these kind of gorgeous women on screen, and, watch these kind of fantastic stories unroll. And one of her absolute heroes was Jean Harlow. And of course, she looks, for those who know what Jean Harlow looks like, she actually looks incredibly similar to Marilyn Monroe, with this sort of candy floss white blonde hair. Um, and so I think she grew up, and has this sort of persona when she's older, the sort of frugality and also the desire to look and be glamorous. And it kind of, that was the whole part of her, I think.
Yes, it was quite interesting because at that time, that was the obviously coming through the 40s and that early period of her in the factory. 44. I know, I love going on about that. I grew up in a village. We had a Second World War aerodrome. That's why I'm always been, and we played in this kind of aerodrome. And so I used to sort of fantasize about all these Americans coming over, and then these stories of people like Marilyn in the factory, ammunitions factory making these bits and pieces that might have come to East Anglia and then gone over to Germany. It just always has a sort of an interesting connection. But obviously, America does change so drastically, and there's this kind of massive economic boom, and then the social change, really, isn't there, throughout America in the 50s as
Yeah,
well.
no, absolutely. But no, I mean, you're absolutely right. It was like it was kind of what was it? The Army Weekly magazine, I think. The photographer took pictures of Norma Jeane when she was in the factory, and that really sort of, she had these overalls on, and putting a girl in overalls sort of feels a bit sort of unglamorous, but she still looks fantastic in those pictures, I think. But then you're right, post-war there was this whole sort of kickstart of the economy and consumer boom, and women were supposed to sort of look very feminine again, and the sort of direct opposite to the sort of jeans and overalls that they were wearing as Rosie the Riveter in
Oh
the
yes,
ammunition
God,
factories.
good old Rose. Yes, I'd vaguely forgot about that, but yes, I did watch one of that particular little thing in our sociology class many
Oh yeah,
decades.
yeah, yeah. No, no, it's that's trying to sort of talk about that sort of social context in the book as well, and I think that it's pretty difficult being a woman in the 50s, actually. And it was pretty difficult being a woman in Hollywood in the 50s as well. There's lots going on that, we still sort of can witness today, but it was sort of like Anne Howe back in the 50s. And so she sort of, she really rose to the challenge, I think.
Yes, and it was interesting that she managed to sort of, I mean, she got married very young and then sort of had this relationship with Arthur, didn't she? The sort of English playwright, which was quite an amazing sort of
Oh,
moment
yeah,
in her
yeah,
life.
no, absolutely. I mean, that was, um, I mean, it is exactly, it's almost like, her film, The Prince and the Showgirl, the showgirl and the academic kind of thing. It's just a really interesting sort of marriage of two what appears to be very, very different people. But I mean, Marilyn was a dichotomy in many ways, and kind of like the misfit that I mean, the playwright Arthur Miller was her third husband, and he sort of defined misfits in the film that he wrote for her of the same name, and I think that Marilyn. She didn't finish high school, but she read Joyce's Ulysses, and she read lots of books, actually. She had a great library. Um, and I think it was the photographer Eve Arnold was really impressed with Marilyn's sort of resolve for self-improvement. And she said that, she kept Ulysses in her car and she'd been reading it for a long time and she loved the sound of it and she'd read it aloud to herself to try and make sense of the words. And I don't know if you've ever picked up a copy of Ulysses, but it's almost indecipherably difficult. Obviously a great classic, but it's one of those kind of modernist novels that's just very hard to get your head around. So I mean, there's this sort of real sense of wanting to self-improve, and maybe that aspiration kind of lent itself to this marriage that she had with Arthur Miller as well, who
Yes.
clearly fell in love with her, and they were very happy for a while.
I know, it's amazing. No, I never did bother with Ulysses. It was a bit
Well,
like I think I had to go with Naked Lunch, and I thought I'm just going to have to quit.
that's kind of fun though. Naked Lunch is fun, and you can just read little paragraphs of it. But yeah. I mean, it's very hard going, very hard
You want
going.
to understand it, but one sort of doesn't. And it's like I'll stick to On the Road and Fear and Loathing by Hunter S. Thompson.
Yes,
But
yeah.
look, just to explain a little bit, because it's kind of fascinating the 50s, because there is McCarthyism. That have you got much of a grip on that whole? You must have because you did the book. But just to explain a little bit what happens in the 50s in America, because on one level it's like, oh, this is brilliant. We've got rock and roll and Elvis and sort of these Hollywood greats, but at the same time, it's got this underbelly, more than probably an underbelly, of kind of absolute like this witch hunt of sort of, are you a
Yeah.
communist? Are you able to just explain a bit about how this happened? As I expect a
Well, I
lot.
suppose what happened was that, there was the Cold War, after World War II finished, um, there was this sort of buoyancy and kind of groupthink to sort of try and kind of feel very sort of positive about things, but actually, we'd witnessed nuclear weapons, and there was this sort of real terror actually that was going on in politics and society. And so the Cold War meant that America was terribly afraid of anything that could be sort of deemed left wing or communist. And obviously, when you think about, maybe kind of a more liberal way of looking at things, that naturally you go towards sort of Hollywood, and lots of playwrights were sort of, as you say, subject to this kind of witch hunt, and accused of being communists. And there was such a kind of Orwellian sort of moment of fear that people were sort of accusing each other left, right, and centre. There were these terrible McCarthy trials where, people had to sit down and defend themselves, including Arthur Miller. And it was really frightening because, in a similar way to some of the things that we witness today in today's society, once someone was accused of being a communist, people kind of ran a mile. They didn't want to defend them. They didn't want to kind of be tarred with the same brush, if you like, and because you'd lose your job and you'd lose your livelihood, and your name would be blacklisted. But Marilyn, so Arthur Miller was called to trial, one of these trials, and Marilyn was told, you can't get involved. It's going to be really bad for your career. But she didn't. She stood by her husband, and she defended him. And not just that, she funded him through the trial as well. So I think that it was a very brave thing to do. But that moment in time, I think there was this sort of anxious sort of energy that was sort of, in a way, balanced by this sort of over cheerful, over kind of gorgeous 50s sort of persona, if you like, which is everything's perfect when really it's not. So yeah, that's what I think about that.
Yes, because obviously then you get the sort of filmmaker David Lynch, and there's this kind of often portrays the sort of the perfect American family with, the husband who goes to work and does his job and then comes home, and there's the perfect wife with all the lovely kitchen gadgets and the perfect children. So that's the kind of
And really,
almost like the
Valley of the
Waltons.
Dolls
It's
going on. Yeah, and really it's the Valley of the Dolls, going on, and everyone's losing their mind and kind of having a nervous breakdown. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, no, I mean, I think it's very much that sort of buttoned up, sort of perfect 50s. And I think that's also why Marilyn was interesting, because there was sort of, hyper sort of idealization of women. And she was very sexy and very alluring. And she kind of lent a sort of permission to be a little bit transgressive in that way as well. So I think there's all sorts of counterintuitive ways of looking at Marilyn. And she certainly wasn't, I don't think, a cliche.
No. Well, it's interesting because looking at the amount of films that she made in such a short period of time, a bit like an artist who was doing almost a film a year, especially during the sort of 50s, which is quite extraordinary. And then it's sort of things towards the end of the 50s, you get The Prince and the Showgirl, then you get Some Like It Hot, which is the classic that we all watched at
Oh, yeah.
Christmas,
Yeah.
which is brilliant. And then this incredibly moving film, The Misfits, which is just kind of one of those ones that features, obviously made by John Huston, a
Mm.
screenplay by Arthur Miller, and then it features, Clark Gable, Montgomery Clift, Marilyn Monroe, and so many people die, don't they?
Yeah.
Which is kind of odd, but this is the look of Marilyn that I personally think just is absolutely amazing, and that's
Yeah,
the
no, I agree. No, I love her in that. I love her in the jeans she wears, and her kind of denim jacket, and her Stetson, and her boots, and she, and there's that cherry dress that she wears as well. All of it so brilliantly captured. What was very fortunate image wise was that the photographer Eve Arnold was on set, so she took lots of fantastic. I mean, there's no better photographer than Eve Arnold, but she took all these amazing black and white shots of Marilyn in all these clothes. But it was a very, very terrible sort of, because it was from my reading of it. Marilyn and Arthur's marriage was disintegrating. He met his future wife on set. Marilyn was sort of becoming quite depressed about lots of different things, and it was kind of constantly difficult to kind of muscle up the nerve to get on set, so she was often late. Clark Gable was an icon of hers, and it was just all very difficult. And obviously you're there in the desert as well, so you're shooting in the heat, and if Marilyn didn't turn up in the morning, then the day just got hotter and hotter, and you can just imagine, and then at night everyone would run off and play casino games and all this kind of stuff, and it was I just wish you could have been a fly on the wall, but the film is a real classic, you're right, and she looks fantastic in it, I think.
Because there's I think it's her last ever photo shoot is when she's on the beach, isn't she, with a sort of big chunky jumper on. And I think you've got a picture in the book of that with a guy called, I did buy a book, a copy of it many decades ago, George somebody, begins with a B, doesn't it? And
Oh,
that,
yes, 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 exactly. On the beach, what was it? In George Barris, that's
yes,
right.
that's the
So
one.
those were in 1962, and she wears that amazing cardigan, and yeah, you're right. I mean, they're just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I think there were those taken in, what was it? Santa Monica. It was just before she died. She looks so carefree and untroubled. Yeah, no, really, really refreshing pictures those are, aren't they? They're beautiful.
Yes, you kind of. It's. I mean, it's like what if? But it would have been fascinating to know how she might have been able to step into the '60s and how that would have been for her, and if she could have made that change. Because obviously, we could see how Elvis didn't sort of. Well, he made a change, but it sort of ended in.
Yeah, the thing that I always sort of find quite interesting is that, Marilyn and Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, were born in the same year. So they were the same age. So when, Marilyn came to London and she shot The Prince and the Showgirl, and she's in that lineup and she shakes the Queen's hand, they're the same age. So, our kind of memory of, King Charles's mother, who obviously has passed away, at her age, that's how old Marilyn would have been, and how would have she manifested, um, is well, it's speculation, isn't it? But it's really, really interesting how she might have kind of maneuvered life. I think she would have gone on to being even more stylish, because when she was doing the film, when she was shooting Something's Got to Give after the Misfits, she was really in her Pucci phase, and she looked so gorgeous in those kind of very simple kind of shift dresses and patterned kind of 60s blouses. I mean, she wasn't young anymore. I mean, not young as in a teenager or anything, but I think that she was kind of more beautiful than ever. And I think she could have really shown us what she was made of. And obviously, it's one of those terrible tragedies that she never got round to, being able to fulfill her destiny in that way.
Yes, I know it would have been. Yes, a few little changes and sort of, listen to the Beatles and the Stones and then go into Woodstock. She could have just been just amazing. She could have.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. I mean, it's really interesting to say, because, I mean, the thing is about the '60s, it was all about youth, though. It was all about kind of being young and sticking it to the man. So who knows? Maybe she would have just sort of ended up kind of being a cool jazz singer in New Orleans and sort of hanging out with different kind of characters, but.
It would be
Or
nice
maybe,
because
maybe Andy Warhol would have adopted her and she'd have been a superstar. Who knows?
So, because the last time we spoke, you had just done your Taylor Swift book, which is absolutely gorgeous, and
Oh,
stunning to look
thank
at.
you.
And
Thank you so much.
did you have this already sort of project on the back, or just there waiting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this book, oh, I can't. It came out just at the end of last year, and it really did sort of take about 3 years from start to finish, which is a very long time. But it was sort of it was proposed, and then I started doing reading and research. Then I wrote a few books in between, but this was always a project that I was kind of, as you say, kept the fire going on, and I was kind of constantly doing image research and looking for kind of interesting pictures and photographers. So it took a while. But it was honestly a labor of love. So I mean, it's brilliant from start to finish for me. And um, I said to the Marilyn Monroe estate when I finished, I felt kind of bereft when I stopped, when I written the last bit and it all gone off to the printers, because I'd spent so long with Marilyn. It was like she was my friend, which is really
Yes.
sad. But I was kind of immersed in her so much, and it was kind of like saying, "Well, I have no reason to do this every day now. I don't have to think about her all the time." So I
Yes.
did really get stuck in there. But I think a lot of people do. The Marilyn fans are the biggest around the world. They're sort of so dedicated, and I can understand completely why.
So when you sort of talk to the estate, because we kind of suddenly go, oh, what does that mean? What does that actually what does that mean in reality? Is
Well,
there
they're
is there
the
a
guardians
is
of
there a
her.
gatekeeper?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's the when you have a sort of very famous public figure like Marilyn Monroe, who didn't have any children and didn't kind of have a family around her, or even if they do, they're quite often what happens is the kind of intellectual property around that person um, is consolidated in an estate, and they're the people that kind of direct um, all the sort of stuff that goes on about her going forward, or whomsoever it is. So the Marilyn Monroe estate is a sort of gatekeeper. They're the ones there trying to constructively keep her sort of spirit alive in the best possible way, defending her sort of status as this icon, and collaborating with like-minded sort of entities. And this book um, was part of that then, really, which meant I just
Yes.
had their support, and I was able to ask them things, and they suggested some photographers that I could look at, which I hadn't kind of come across before. So it was a sort of nice way of doing it.
Yes, it's quite amazing because you sort of it, it feels like you've got a absolute sort of mission to sort of champion and promote, or uh, I'm trying not to use the word defend here, but just, like all these kind of amazing female artists and characters and singers, in a way that's, really celebrate them, but also make sure that their legacy going forward is kind of done with
Yeah.
absolute integrity.
I think so, and I sort of remember something I was told. I used to work at ID magazine back in the 90s, so a long time ago, and I remember the publisher Terry Jones said to me, you can always find something good to say about something. You can always find something good, and so I always think that that's my kind of attitude is always find something good to write. Always find something. If pointing out stuff that you're interested in, find something good about someone. Look at things maybe from a different point of view, but always try and celebrate the good stuff, because as you say, you know life is pretty miserable if you don't.
Yes, and sort of if I ever sort of my mindset isn't quite what I think is brilliant. I think, well, God, what does that say to me if I'm sort of always focusing on the negative, or trying to sort of find something clever to put something down, which I might have
Mm.
done in my younger days, but now as I get older, you think, no, that's not really an appealing personality, is it
Well,
really?
it can be funny, let's face it.
It can be
It can
very
be
funny.
very, very funny, and that's what humor is about. But I think when I'm writing, I try to make it a celebration and, just point out things that I'm interested in and I think are great. So this Marilyn book has been, as you say, another great, gorgeous woman that I've had the pleasure of writing about. So I'm very, very happy. Yeah.
And what was it? Or was there anything in particular that you discovered that you hadn't been aware of when you had started the project?
Well, I suppose I'd always felt her relevance as a sort of fashion icon in a way, but I suppose and even though that when she was alive, she would wear um, pieces from Gucci, suits by Dior, and all these kind of and Claire McCardle, some really interesting designers, as well as the stage designers who created for her. But what I thought was suppose was quite interesting is that uh, her wardrobe, even though I kind of instinctively felt it was very relevant, digging into it and trying to find the evidence, her personal wardrobe and this minimal aesthetic, which you mentioned at the beginning, and how she sort of represents femininity on all its forms, really has influenced designers today. And when you look at their mood boards, they kind of see beyond the obvious glamour. And they mine those sort of beatnik Aran sweaters that she wore in the Let's Make Love film, in the in 1960s. Um, in 1960, all that kind of, she had this kind of blanket like Dior camel overcoat that she wore when she was in New York in 1954. There were these great shots of her there. And she ran away from Hollywood, and that was when she was starting her own production company. There's a real cultural context, as we were talking about, to her visual performance, but I think she's a very graphic symbol of womanhood, and that has absolutely inspired, and designers really pay homage to it, reinventing it and reimagining it time and time again. So, not just Versace and Dolce Gabbana, but Yves Saint Laurent, Max Mara, Elie Saab, Comme des Garçons, Miu Miu, these Tom Brown, there are all these kind of amazing designers who recognize how very stylish she was, and actually that was a great joy for me, joining those dots and seeing how very much she really is still very relevant and influential.
Yes. Did you find that looking at that particular decade quite fascinated in the sort of the stars of the time, the movie stars or the sort of musicians, but especially the movie stars. There just seemed to be an amazing abundance and such interesting characters at that point as well.
Yeah,
You know,
well, it's just so romantic, isn't it? I suppose the thing is, people would go to the cinema because they didn't have the internet. And that's what people did for fun, and I mean, I've found old diaries of my mother's, who's sadly not with us anymore, but you know she goes to the cinema almost like 3 or 4 times a week, and that's what people did, and that's what this Hollywood dream machine was out there creating and making all these kind of films because people wanted them, and that was entertainment, and they wanted to sort of see these stars, and it is kind of fun and interesting to see that. um you know One of my sort of favorite quotes from Marilyn was that she said, I knew I belonged to the public and to the world, not because I was talented or even beautiful, but because I'd never belonged to anyone else. The public was the only family and the only Prince Charming and the only home I ever dreamt of. And to me, that really kind of encapsulates this idea of the cinema being this sort of touchstone for her, but also lots of people at the time. It was a way of escaping, seeing things, finding glamour, taking themselves away from their worlds, and that's what she did when she was young, and that's what she was bound to sort of serve her public by, being the very best film star she could be when she was older. So I think that's probably part of it, isn't it?
yes. Well, it's interesting because I think you also, your one of your main periods. I know you were in. idea in the 90s, but you were probably throughout the 80s, you were sort of definitely out and about, weren't you? Sort of doing your sort of kind of socializing and sort of getting your sort of early cultural moments. And you look back and you think, oh,
I mean,
that's
that's
amazing.
when, you kind of grow up in your formative years and you find music for the first time and you go to gigs and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that's when lots of exciting things happen to you, when you connect music and fashion and, style, and you find people that inspire you.
Yes. And but it's interesting that quite a few of them you then realise have referenced something from different decades as well. And obviously the 50s is a very rich decade that some of us went back to watching those kitchen sink dramas like Taste of Honey and Saturday Night, Sunday Morning and films like that. And then, I was just looking at that list of people who'd been blacklisted on the McCarthy trials, and most of them are sort of playwrights, aren't they, and directors and actors. It's quite interesting, from Charlie Chaplin to Edward G. Robinson, one of those great actors who was in The Cincinnati Kid. And I was just thinking, the 50s, you can see why it was so interesting for us in the 80s, sometimes delving back into those other decades and how rich the 50s was. And that's,
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, even, certainly, um, what was it? Somebody like Blondie, for example, was really inspired by Marilyn. With her sort of punky, sort of blondie look,
yes.
that was kind of very Marilyn. So I think sometimes people kind of took those 50s and sort of recreated it in a very sort of accurate way, but otherwise, other times it was just in that kind of slightly deconstructed way as well. But it was more about the sort of cultural landscape and sort of connecting in all sorts of different ways.
Well, it's interesting because there was the James Dean films that I guess I say the royal we probably ticked off, Rebel Without a Cause and Giant
Mm.
and East of Eden. And then there was Marlon Brando and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and all those kind of films that
No,
came out around
iconic.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we watched them, and Cool Hand Luke, and I can see, looking, thinking about Marilyn, having seen, read the book and sort of looking at sort of various bits and pieces, like what an amazing decade it was. Because I also got quite obsessed with the dancing scene at that time of, Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire and Sid Charisse and all those kind of
Oh,
periods as well.
yeah. Yeah,
And
no, absolutely. It's got it all, hasn't it? Yeah, no, I mean, I always sort of say that, every decade it's a sort of has a sort of character, but when you look into it, every decade's got multiple characters going on. And so the 50s, it's like you say, you kind of went from the kind of leather jackets of Marlon Brando through to the sort of chic suavery of Fred Astaire, and everything in between. You had beatniks, you had sort of, poets, you had rock and roll, and then you had sort of Marilyn and, all these kind of gorgeous sort of aspirational kind of film stars as well. So it's a real culture mix, the 50s, that continues to kind of keep me interested anyway.
yes, well, you mentioned Debbie Harry, and then obviously there was Madonna doing her, like homage to sort of Marilyn as
Oh,
well.
yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. And then you've also got, Billie Eilish and Beyonce and all these kind of, Taylor Swift has also done a Marilyn with the blowing up halter neck dress. It's a sort of, almost sort of, it's on everybody's sort of sartorial wish list to look like Marilyn at some point, it seems.
Yes, I know, it's brilliant, and I have to say, I just love your work. I think it's absolutely genius. So I'm so
Oh,
pleased that
well,
you.
thank you so much for inviting me to come and chat again. I will
No,
keep
that's
you posted on the next one, and I hopefully come back and chat again.
yes. Well, look, and I'll send a link to this interview to your publisher. But thank you ever so much again,
Oh,
Terry, for
no,
this.
thank you. Thank you, David.
It's
That's brilliant.
always amazing.
Yeah, no, it's fun to chat. And yeah,
And I
I'll
will
be
keep in
in
touch.
touch. Yeah.
And talking of Taylor Swift, hopefully, if it all goes well, we're going to go and see. We're going to Vegas next month actually, to see, and because we love Vegas, and we're going to go and see Dita Von Teese, and who apparently did a I think Taylor Swift did a dance or got her to choreograph one of her sort of videos, didn't
Yes,
she? So it'll
yeah.
be interesting to see her take on, a performance from Dita Von Teese. So
That is going to be amazing. Gosh, that's something to look forward to. Oh, lucky you. I'm very jealous.
yeah, well, it's nice, isn't it? And then we'll do a road trip, and then just enjoy the ambience sort of that area. But anyway.
Yeah, rock and roll. Yeah.
Rock and roll. Well, I'll definitely go and see the Lee Bowery now that you've sort of given it the thumbs up, because that sounds
No, I
fascinating.
think it is. It's pretty good. It's a nice. It's a good. It's a good afternoon's worth of fun and sort of joy. Really, it's a great celebration of what he was about. So yeah, I think it's worth going to. Yeah,
Yes, I know.
all for
It's
the positives. All for the
all
positives.
absolutely. It would be amazing. Yeah, and if you ever listen to sort of books being read, and the Boy George latest one is on Spotify. If you've got that, it's quite
I'll look
interesting.
out for that. No, and I love everything he does. So I think that's a great recommendation. Thank you.
I know he's good. But look, have a lovely evening, and thanks again, Terry. It's been
Oh
amazing.
no, brilliant. Thanks. So brilliant to speak to you again. Take care, David. See you
You
soon.
too. Bye
Bye.
bye. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. I'm sure you gathered that. A massive thank you to Terry Newman for giving me the time talking about Marilyn Monroe and the publication that's just come out on ACC Books, Art Books. I will put a link in the notes below. But absolutely worth tracking down and buying a copy. It's beautiful. Anyway, this has been the C86 Show. Have a great week. Stay safe.